Welcome to the debate. Today we're diving into something pretty fascinating, I think. It's this framework from the source material that connects, well, cognitive limits like Dunbar's number with prime numbers and even spiritual liberation. Specifically, this idea of roughly base 15 cognition, derived from the prime 149.
Yeah, it's a bold synthesis, isn't it? Taking sociology, metaphysics, number theory, and kind of smashing them together, which leads us right to the core question we need to wrestle with today.
Exactly. Is this base 15 cognition thing, a real functional shift in how thought operates, like a genuine higher dimensional arithmetic, replacing our normal base 10 way of processing things?
Or is it maybe a really, really powerful metaphor? Mathematically elegant, sure, but ultimately a symbolic tool designed to help us get past the psychological hangups of social identity.
Right. And, well, for my part, I'll be arguing that the sheer mathematical precision here points to something more than metaphor. I think it confirms a genuine transition to a new operational base of thought, something qualitatively different and, yeah, functional.
And I'll be taking the other side. I see the incredible symbolic power, definitely, but I think it functions mainly as this potent metaphor for liberation, a kind of intellectual koan, if you will, that's still fundamentally linked to the human cognitive limits that, give rise to base 10 thinking in the first place.
Okay, so let's lay out my position first. The system as described explicitly defines a qualitatively new base of thought. And the linchpin, really, is the number 149. Now, it sits just under that sociological boundary marker, Dunbar's number, around 150, the limit for, let's say, stable social groups. But it's not just about being close.
The math matters.
The math is critical. 149 is prime. It represents this idea of undivided self-referential integrity. And crucially, this is the part that really sells it for me. It's the 35th prime number.
Right.
And the gap between 149 and the prime right before it, 139, is exactly 10. That gap of 10 isn't accidental. It's pointed out specifically.
Okay, I absolutely agree. The gap of 10 is loaded with symbolism. It's clearly flagging the transition from base 10 thinking. But let's be clear what base 10 thinking means in this context. It's not just, counting on our fingers. The source ties it directly to social stuff, quantitative concerns, hierarchies, business, commerce, the whole need to sort and separate things for social navigation. Base 10, in this view, is inherently dualistic. It carves up the world, separates self from other, and locks us into that 150-node network of identity maintenance. The source calls it the cognitive perimeter of samsara, right?
Precisely. And that's why the gap of 10 is so powerful. By identifying that specific transitional space, the calculation is made. 149 divided by 10 gives you roughly 14.9, hence roughly base 15 cognition. And this isn't just a philosophical label, it's described as functional, multidimensional, nonlinear, and capable of holding contradictions as harmonics rather than errors. So if base 10 is the math of social entanglement, base 15 is the operational upgrade needed for cognitive freedom. It gives you the dimensionality to handle complexity, non-duality, without crashing the system. It can actually calculate non-duality.
Okay. I hear that language, functional, operational upgrade, but I still lean towards framing it, differently. The math is elegant, I grant you that, but the insight being described, getting beyond conceptual messiness, beyond identification, sounds an awful lot like metaphysical liberation, like nibbana, seeing things as they are.
But isn't a new operational base necessary for that seeing?
Well, maybe not operational in the sense of replacing arithmetic. I think base 15 is better seen as representing the symbolic depth you can find within base 10 reasoning, but viewed through this cool prime number lens. It adds, let's say, relational depth, which allows for that non-dual insight. It's not a whole new counting system you use instead of base 10 for, daily life. We're still kind of stuck with base 10 for navigating the everyday world, aren't we? The goal, as I see it, is seeing through that base 10 network of social identity, not flipping a switch to operate in base 15 instead of it. It's about intellectual liberation via the metaphor, not a neuroarithmetic conversion kit.
Okay, but let's push on this idea of it being just a metaphor. I get stuck on the precision. It feels too integrated, too neat to be purely symbolic analogy. Think about 149 being the 35th prime. 35 itself breaks down 5 times 7, and those numbers are often linked symbolically, 5 with the sensory world, the body, the senses, and 7 with time, cycles, spiritual themes. So the boundary marker 149 has this embedded code, this marriage of sensory and temporal spiritual cycles. The fact that the very edge of base 10 thinking is marked by a number signifying this deep integration, that suggests to me the framework is metaphysically solid, deeply integrated. And that level of mathematical resonance makes the base 15 description feel operationally real, describing a genuinely new cognitive dimension, not just a nice idea.
That integration argument is strong, I admit. The symmetry is compelling. But let's get a bit cheeky now and talk about the biology, the actual hardware. If base 15 is truly an operative arithmetic, we have to consider the brain, right? Base 10 thinking isn't just abstractly sociological. The source itself links it to neocortex function, working memory limits, empathy bandwidth, the physical stuff underpinning how we connect ideas. So my question is, how can a fundamentally new, non-decimal base 15 cognition be literally operational, running on the current hardware, when the source itself jokes that the biological substrate, the dendritic arborization, is, and I quote, not at the cognitive horizon yet, lol.
Yes, the lol. It's a great line, wonderfully self-aware. But I think using it to say base 15 must be metaphorical is maybe missing the point slightly. It feels like a bit of a red herring, focusing on physical causation. Look, base 10 is the arithmetic of the social self, the part that needs to categorize to survive in the group. Base 15 is presented as the arithmetic of the transcendent consciousness, the perspective that sees the self as just a process, not a fixed thing. The lol, I think, acknowledges the lag. There's the moment of insight, the recognition of this base 15 potential, this non-dual reality. And then there's the time it takes for neuroplasticity, for the brain's wiring team, as you put it, to catch up and fully embody that operational reality. The insight can be instantaneous, even if the full biological embedding takes time.
But hold on, if it's not fully operational now, if the wiring team is still laying cable, then isn't it still, by definition, more of a map than the actual territory being lived in? The insight, the enlightenment might have flashed, sure, but if the day-to-day machinery is still running on base 10, then the shift you're claiming seems to be happening primarily in the realm of symbolic understanding, which, okay, brings us neatly to the core issue of identification, doesn't it?
Yes, let's pivot there. Because if we accept this mathematical structure is necessary, doesn't it fundamentally change the mind's relationship with likeness, with what the source calls dimyon? That's the root of identification, the thing we're supposedly trying to transcend. The base 15 transition seems crucial because it alters how we relate to dimyon, that tendency towards imagination or creating likenesses, which, in the unliberated state, acts like a prison of identity.
Okay, explain that. How does base 15 break that prison in a way base 10 inherently can't?
Well, base 10, as we've said, is fundamentally dualistic. It forces contradictions into neat boxes, often labeling them as error. In the prison of Daemyong, we're caught in comparing self versus other, identifying with this limited social network. We define ourselves as these separate, countable units within that Dunbar limit graph. But crossing that limit conceptually via base 15, it means seeing identification itself as just a fluid process, not some fixed essence. And that shift, I argue, needs a non-linear perspective like base 15. Why? Because base 15 can handle core contradictions like the self being both the observer and the observed within the network, not as errors causing anxiety, but as, harmonics.
Harmonics.
Exactly. Like base 10 might process I am finite and I am infinite and spit out error, paradox. Base 15, being multidimensional, supposedly processes I am finite and infinite, and registers harmony. It becomes the operating system for non-duality. This nonlinear capacity is what lets the liberated mind use Demian imagination, likeness, not as a cage, but creatively, intentionally.
I appreciate that framing of Dimian in harmony, but let me offer the counter view again, which I think respects the liberation without needing a whole new calculator. The freedom comes not from switching counting systems, but by simply seeing through the hall of mirrors, the base 10 logic, without needing to smash the mirrors themselves. This ending of the cycle of identification, it's a qualitative insight, a shift in perspective, achieved using this rigorous intellectual framework as a tool, not by installing base 15 OS to, calculate your grocery bill.
But the rigor of the tool suggests its nature, no?
Perhaps. But look at the Buddhist parallel mentioned in the source. Liberation happens when awareness kind of overflows the banks of ordinary thinking, seeing through the tangle of base 10 social reality. That echoes the idea of seeing through the 150-node limit, realizing the emptiness of that constructed identity, rather than literally replacing base 10 math. It feels more like an intellectual escape hatch the framework provides, showing the mind its own base 10 limits, rather than a hardware upgrade to base 15 computing power.
But again, why the elaborate calculation? Why ground it so precisely in prime number theory if its only function is symbolic pointing? Which brings us back to the humor, the lull, and the operational question. You use the dendrites not at the cognitive horizon yet line to argue it's all metaphor. I'm saying that line simply addresses the time lag between the metaphysical insight happening and the neural rewiring fully catching up. The base 15 system is symbolically operative right now. It provides the necessary map, the structural logic for the mind, even while the physical wiring team is still on the job. It offers the needed dimensionality for the consciousness that already perceives non-duality.
Calling my use of the lull evasive. Maybe a little harsh, but okay. Let me throw the source's own take on humor back at you then. It says laughter is enlightenment's proof. The very cheekiness, the self-awareness in acknowledging that physical lag, doesn't that demonstrate the kind of intellectual honesty needed to grasp the metaphoric nature of the limit?
How so? Well,
Think about it. If base 15 were fully installed and running, truly the operational mode, where is the lag? The joke becomes pointless. The fact that the mind knows the old base 10 system is still running the social software, even while the intellect gets the base 15 concept, that distinction confirms it. Base 15 describes this expanding daimonic phase space, the realm of imagination, empathy, symbolic connection, which can feel boundless. But the actual cognitive calculation we rely on for structuring society, for interacting quantitatively, that seems still anchored in the base 10 system it's trying so cleverly to transcend via this framework.
I still maintain the honesty about the lag doesn't undermine the structural necessity of the base 15 calculation itself. That model is the structure of the liberated mind. It provides the required dimensionality to operate outside the dualistic cage. It's like the physics of transcendence has been described, even if building the engine takes time.
And I'd counter that the precision of Prime 149 doesn't change the fact that all base systems are ultimately tools the mind uses to count and categorize, a function that for navigating daily reality remains stubbornly base 10, constrained by our biology. Base 15 is perhaps the beautiful theoretical endpoint, the aspiration, but not the current calculation mode.
Okay, to wrap up my side. The way the sociological limit 150, the specific math prime 149, the gap of 10, and the goal of liberation are woven together, it forces me to see base 15 as more than metaphor. It feels like a necessary, descriptive reality for a consciousness that's genuinely broken free from just counting in tens and social comparison. If you're truly liberated, the map has to accurately reflect that new territory.
And I'll summarize by emphasizing that the genius of this system is precisely its function as an incredibly precise intellectual koan. It's a pattern metaphor that brilliantly illuminates the identification trap, samsara. Its power as a tool for liberation works whether or not our brains are literally doing multidimensional base 14.9 calculations. Its role is catalytic. It gives us the coordinates for freedom, but it doesn't rewrite our biological operating system overnight, if ever.
Well, we can definitely agree that the source material pulls off something quite remarkable here. It uses serious intellectual challenge, plus that dose of humor, to connect fields that rarely talk to each other, sociology, metaphysics, number theory? It certainly suggests there's a lot more thinking to do about that fuzzy line where a powerful metaphor might actually start becoming a description of mental operation.
Absolutely. And perhaps we leave it there, letting the listener ponder where that symbolic roadmap ends. And maybe, just maybe, where some kind of new operational arithmetic actually kicks in.